Mortal Kombat 3. What else can I say about this iconic classic? This, hands down for me personally, is one of my favourite fighting games of all time. And it was published and developed by Midway for the arcades in 1995, and it later then got a release on consoles, mainly the likes of the Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive, and also the PlayStation 1. And if you're not familiar with the idea behind this game, it is a direct sequel to Mortal Kombat 2, but instead of the first two games being based off the Mortal Kombat tournament itself, the third game moves away from that, as Shao Kahn, the main enemy of the game, he invades Earthrealm. So if you've ever watched the Mortal Kombat movie that was released in 1995, and even Mortal Kombat Annihilation, you can see where they got those ideas from for the movies. They got them pretty much from the games. And the PlayStation version is considered to be the near perfect arcade conversion, because that was always a thing back then, where games were released as ports from the arcade, and sometimes they never lived up to the popularity or pretty much pixel perfect adaptations to what was presented in the arcade titles, because in most cases the arcade versions were usually always flawless, and this version of the game was the closest one to that. But funnily enough, my first experience in Mortal Kombat 3 wasn't with the PlayStation 1 itself. It actually started back on the Super Nintendo. My friend that lived across the road, Derek, he had a Super Nintendo, and this was long before we had even been introduced to the PlayStation. We didn't even know what the PlayStation was at this point, and it was in late 1995, and he managed to get Mortal Kombat 3 within the first week of its release. But I remember he telling me a story that he ended up paying big money for it back then. He paid like something like 70 Irish pounds for it back in one of the game stores, which was crazy money back then, and like he was only about 13 or 14 back in 1995. So yeah, you can kind of get an idea how the years have gone by pretty much. And I remember him taking the game over, and we had already been familiar with the likes of Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2, but it was with Mortal Kombat 3 where I really started to really fall in love with the franchise. Although I was familiar with the likes of certain characters in the previous games, and I had my favourites, but Mortal Kombat 3 took it up to a whole new level. The gameplay was a lot faster compared to the previous two games. There was loads of additional features, extra fatalities, and what I loved as well was the combat system, the fact that you could do combos and just really just destroy your opponents. And I remember us playing Mortal Kombat 3 in the SNES. The Super Nintendo version, I will admit, in my opinion, even though it's not as well refined as the PlayStation version or the arcade version, the Super Nintendo version of that game was a damn good version of it. It actually played faster than the PlayStation version. The soundtrack on that version of the game was absolutely epic. If you don't believe me, go on to watch other videos on YouTube right now and listen to the soundtrack, and you'll be blown away by how good the Super Nintendo version was. It was incredible, and it was just as good as the other versions, and it was actually, it played way faster. It was so funny, the sound effects and everything. I remember myself and Derek and my brothers, we would sit on a Saturday night or the weekends, my parents would go out and we'd be left in the house. Like, we were obviously old enough to look after my younger brothers at the time. I was about 13 or 14, and we played Mortal Kombat 3 for hours upon hours upon hours. Now, myself and Derek were the only two that were good enough to really pull off the combos. Now, I could never really do the fatalities. Derek could do the fatalities, but just the laughs, I swear to God, the laughs that we had with that game. I love playing with the likes of playing Liu Kang against Cabal, because every time Liu Kang got hit, because the screams were completely over the top. Whenever you done a fatality on Liu Kang, was just completely just out there. You'll never forget it, and we'd be in stitches laughing. It was so funny. We had such a ball playing Mortal Kombat 3 over the years. So then eventually when it did come out, when I managed to get my hands on the PlayStation 3 version, I was excited to get to play it all over again. But I will admit, I was kind of like at first a bit put out, because it was like, this game's a lot slower. But then I was so used to playing it on the Super Nintendo, because it was so mental, it was just so fast paced, and to play it where it actually was a wee bit slower on the PlayStation version. But then again, the graphics were better, and the sound effects and that were a lot more refined, because it was as close to the arcade version as possible. So it did take a little bit of a while to adapt to it, but I will admit, when I got into that game as well, I equally enjoyed it as much. And again, just Mortal Kombat 3 it is an epic game. It's an all-time classic. If you haven't played it, or any of the original ones, you do need to play it. There's only two things that I will say honestly that I do not like about Mortal Kombat 3, and that is the level of difficulty, because no matter what difficulty you play on, it's so hard to win games, because the AI with all these old type of fighting games, you always use cheap tactics to win matches, so it'll frustrate the hell out of you. But it's one of those type of games you'll keep coming back for more, you'll be a glutton for punishment. And the second thing I hate, and probably the most thing that everybody hated about Mortal Kombat 3, was that they left out Scorpion, which is pretty much the staple of the franchise, the most iconic character in the Mortal Kombat universe, and they left him out of the game. You were devastated. You're like, where's Scorpion? Where's Scorpion? Like, you did have a couple of hidden characters, like if you could do like cheat codes, or if you finished the game you could end up unlocking a robotic version of Smoke, which ideally was Scorpion anyway. He was essentially the same type of character, but just with a few different moves. But you had all the usual things where you had like the claw, and that made up for it. To be honest, you found yourself using Smoke a lot more because it was as close to Scorpion as you could get. But I still feel that leaving Scorpion out was a miss on that part, but they made up for it in later installments in the game, because later on the Super Nintendo and even on the Mega Drive, they did release another version, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which brought a lot of those characters back that were cut out of Mortal Kombat 3. And then later on the PlayStation, they brought out Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which combined all of the characters from all of the original 3 games all in one package, and that in itself was just epic. That, I'll be honest, I played that for ages, even to get back to playing likes of original versions of Jax and Kano and even Raiden. All you had to do was just press start on the character and it would change back to their original like Mortal Kombat 2 or Mortal Kombat 1 counterparts. And again, they had all their own unique movesets that were tied to those versions of the characters as well, which was really awesome. So in terms of how good Mortal Kombat 3 was, even aside from the nostalgia, it was a commercial success in the arcades and even for the likes of Midway as well. It ended up making a ton of money, loads of people played it, people spent hours in the arcades. It sold tons of copies on consoles, and which did lead on to the sequels of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 and Mortal Kombat Trilogy also receiving equally as good a success, because it was a really good mix of gameplay, visuals, the fatalities, and even the likes of the combos. And with the additional sequels, there was also additional features also added in, and even with the likes of Mortal Kombat Trilogy, I do remember a certain cheat code that you could use where you can unlock everything, so you could have one hit fatalities. As soon as you would finish off an opponent, you literally could destroy them with only one button, and depending on the button you would press would pull off a different fatality or a brutality, animality, whatever it was that was there available at the time. So it definitely made it a lot easier, especially for us not so good gamers that couldn't pull off a fatality. It was just just brilliant. There's not much I can say about this game other than to say that it is a classic. Yes, it will drive you mad, but it's one of those games you'll still go back and play it again. It just was brilliant, and it was this game that really got me into the franchise. And even though I had really enjoyed the previous 2 games, which I did, it wasn't until Mortal Kombat 3 where I really fell in love with the franchise. It was just a pity they left out Scorpion. That's all I'm going to say about that, but it more than made up for it with later titles, so it was worth the wait. But I would love to know your thoughts on Mortal Kombat 3, if you have played it yourself, and if so, what version of the game did you manage to play? Did you play it on the PlayStation or on other consoles like the Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, or did you happen to play it in the arcade? And if so, what are your stories of this epic game? I'd love to hear them, so be sure to share them down in the comments below. And if you'd like to see more of these type of videos where I do provide other reviews and gameplay style videos of other similar type of classic fighting games that were released on the PS1, then make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated when future videos are released. And do feel free to check around other videos on the channel, as I do provide other similar type of reviews and gameplay videos of similar type of games that were also released on the system. So as always, make sure to keep playing those classic games and enjoying them, and keep those gaming memories alive.
Sub-Zero wins.